how much I love you guys.
Okay.
And, you know, maybe for some of you, you may not feel it or think I show it, but I do love you guys. I really do. And you bless me. There's a letter. Bill Davis has it. And if you were not at the meeting Wednesday night, he will give you that letter. If you have some more questions, it may answer your questions. But if you were here and went through the meeting, read the letter and give it back so we can recycle, because I don't know if I have enough between this service and next service. We can always copy more if we need to. So I want to read something that, before I read it, I'm going to read the James passage first, but don't pull it up yet, Guy. In thinking about a lot of things this week, it kind of brought to the surface stuff that I think about. You know, if you go through something like this, if you don't self-reflect, you tend to cast stones very quickly. And because a lot of times we have to look at our own stuff and realize, oh my God, but for the grace of God.
Amen.
And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about words. And what the Bible says about words and about listen. And let me read that passage, and then I'll go on and tell you about my problem with my tongue. My dear brothers and sisters, don't be so eager to become a teacher in the church, since you know that we who teach are held to a higher standard of judgment. We all fail in many areas, but especially with our words. Yet if we're able to bridle the words we say, we're powerful enough to control ourselves in every way. And that means our character is mature and fully developed. I hate that part. Yeah. You kind of realize just how far along you ain't. Anyway, horses have bits and bridles in their mouths so that we can control and guide their large body. The same with mighty ships. Though they're massive and driven by fierce winds, yet they're steered by a tiny rudder at the direction of the person at the helm. And so the tongue is a small part of the body, yet it carries great power. Just think of how a small flame can set a huge forest ablaze. When the tongue is afire, it can be compared to the sum total of wickedness and is the most dangerous part of our human body. It corrupts the entire body and is a hellish flame. It releases a fire that can burn throughout the course of human existence. For every wild animal on earth, including birds, creeping reptiles, and creatures of the sea and land, have all been overpowered and tamed by humans. But the tongue is not able to be tamed. It's fickle, unrestrained, evil that spews out words full of toxic poison. We use our tongue to praise God, our Father, and then turn around and curse a person who is made in his very image. I've never done that. Out of the same mouth, we pour out words of praise one minute and curses the next. My brothers and sisters, this should never be. Would you look for olives hanging on a fig tree or go pick figs from a grapevine? Is it possible that fresh and bitter water can flow out of the same spring? So neither can a bitter spring produce fresh water. Tough stuff, huh? Might as well, let's get all the scriptures out, and then we'll talk a little bit about them. Since Mitchell took most of my time. Go to the Matthew passage if you would, Guy. When virtue is stored within, the hearts of good and upright people will produce good fruit. But when evil is hidden within, those who are evil will produce evil fruit. You can be sure of this: when the day of judgment comes, everyone will be held accountable for every careless word he has spoken. And your very words will be used as evidence against you, and your words will declare you either innocent or guilty. Okay? Go to the Proverbs. Most of you know this one. Your words are so powerful that they will kill or give life, and the talkative person will reap the consequences. You know, there's another one that says, in the abundance of words. Huh?
I think, oh God.
Shut up. Yeah. And there's another one that says, in the abundance of words, sin is not absent. That's another proverb. Could go on with it. Hey, I was thinking about this. I was thinking about how many times I've gotten into trouble because I let something go. Now, wisdom is when you have the thought. Wisdom means learning not to say it if you know you shouldn't. That's wisdom. That's why he talks about maturity and all that kind of stuff. Because wisdom would be, you know what, bite your tongue. You don't need to say anything here. Leave it. Leave it. I can remember all these times having arguments with Sheila. And, well, you know, once or twice in 40-something years that we argued. Yeah, once or twice a day. Anyway, what was funny about that is that there were many times that as she was speaking, I had these words coming up that I wanted to go back at her with. And I almost was saying, okay, God, this is what I'm going to do. And it was almost like he was saying, I don't think so. And I would say, man, I don't want to hear it. And go ahead and speak them. Did I regret it? Oh, God. Right? I mean, seriously, it's because all of a sudden it comes out there and it's done. And whatever pain or whatever destruction that's going to happen, it's done. You've done it. Now, I know it says that you'll be judged for every idle word that you speak. And I think in a way that kind of happens in this life most of the time. Now, understand this. There's a whole group of folks out there that talk about positive confessions and all this. And you know, if you say something, it's going to happen. Guys, that's superstitious stuff. Oh, if you make that statement, don't make that statement because it may happen. I mean, sometimes in jest we make statements about stuff, right? Kind of laughing about it or whatever. And sometimes there can be some truth behind it. But the problem with saying that everything I say, you know, it's going to all of a sudden, oh my God, I said this, so this is going to happen to me. No. Not talking about that. I think always when we talk about words that kill, destroy, that do all of those kinds of things, you have to come back even to the command that is part of the 10 Commandments. That says, don't bear false witness against your neighbor. Right? There you go. There's your words. And I think words that destroy your friend, your spouse, your brothers, your sisters, words that destroy people, words that are hate-filled, that go against, it was all about this relational thing, and I truly believe that's what God's talking about. It's based on relational. How do you relate to other people, and what do you say about it? You know, there are times you can be so angry with someone, and there are times I wanted to kill some people. And I remember years ago listening to a sermon on murder, and the guy went through the whole thing of Jesus' Matthew passage where he talks about the three different forms of hate, and what leads to murder. It's like adultery. Says if you lust in your mind, you've already committed it. And what he's saying in that passage is there is a place that if you hate enough, you're murdering that person. So there are also words that we can entertain in our heart because God always is there, right? That can get us in trouble. And then there are words that we speak out that get us in trouble. Now, Paul says, let your words be seasoned with grace. Now, I've thought about that so many times when I've opened my mouth, inserted foot, and I thought, this sure doesn't taste like salt. Tastes like I stepped in something, and it makes it worse. But and I think about all of the kind of hurt, especially when I was sharing something juicy about someone. And we need to pray for them. That's the Christian way of getting around that, I want to tell you something about such and such so we can pray for them. And then the problem with that element is that typically then somebody tells the next person, and I don't know if you ever played the little gossip circle when you were a kid, where somebody gives you something to say and you tell the next one, and by the time it comes around to the end, they ask you, well, what did they say? And it's totally different. I mean, it's not even close, by the time it comes around. And it gets all whacked out. But, that's always the danger in that kind of stuff. That doesn't mean, though, that we don't learn to sit down with one another and process stuff. Sometimes you need someone that you can just vomit all over. Sorry, but you need that. You need to vent. You need to let that stuff go. David did that in his prayers. If you hadn't seen the article that Mary Beth sent out, it's called Pissed Off Prayers. And basically that's what it is. It's David, all the prayers that David did that are just angry. He's angry at God. He's angry at all kinds of stuff. But he's kind of venting there. I remember sitting down with a man years ago. He was so angry. And he was specifically angry at God. I think it was indirective, but he was very angry at God. And but you have to understand that his father was an alcoholic, came home and would beat him and just horribly abused him. And so, he grew up, became a believer, loved Jesus. But anytime something would happen in his life or whatever, he would scream and yell at God and curse him, all of those things. And I remember talking to him, and thinking, there were times early on that I used to think, oh my, this is terrible. You ought to be doing that kind of, those kind of things. And then it came to me that God has pretty big shoulders. And God knew the pain that was in this still little boy's heart. that was railing out against his father, who treated him unjustly. And so finally one day I looked at him, I said, listen, God's big enough to handle your anger. Spew it out to him. You know, I met him, I guess it was a few years ago, I met him for lunch one day, and it's like there was a shalom over him. It's an amazing peace. And he talked about how he was completely healed. That he doesn't rail at God anymore. That all of that stuff is finally gone. See, God knew ultimately where this person was going to come to. God knew where he ultimately would bring him. It wasn't pretty in the meantime. But his words were directed at God. They weren't directed at others. Now, what happens many times is wounded people tend to wound people. It's just normal. We know that. Believe you me, we know that. That's not only in deep wounds and abusive situations and all that, but it's also just in relationships. When husband pulls out his sword and goes at the wife, I'm talking about the sword of his mouth, and says something hurtful, and bang, she comes out and, I'm wounded. I'm going to get you back good. And then it goes, all these arrows get shot at each other. Bam, 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 bam. And it doesn't solve anything. It just raises up more pain. More pain. More pain. So I think we have a picture that we can see in many ways. And I think it's just one that we have to continually bring up before our eyes and before our hearts and before our lives, is that learning to be very careful what we say to someone else, or even what we say about someone else. And who we say what we say to. I think all those things matter. And it doesn't mean that if you go to someone and you vent and you get all this stuff out, that you're guilty of all kinds of... No, you're only guilty of trying to get some kind of healing for yourself. That's what venting is about. And some of it is about you exposing to the light the things that are going on inside of you, instead of running around and hanging on to that stuff so that it churns up in you and causes some kind of sickness. Because that's what it'll do. So while there's some strong stuff around this, I think that the biggest part of what we have to look at is, in use of my words, does it bring healing to relationships, or does it make things worse? I think it comes down to that. Do my words bring healing and health and wholeness to the person I'm directing them to or talking about ultimately? I'm not talking about just your stuff. How does that affect relationship? How does that affect my ability to walk in love with Jesus? John, the apostle, used to be brought in he was 90, so probably 100. And he was brought into the church at Ephesus on a stretcher, and they would ask him to speak. And he would just raise his frail little hand and look at them. He says, love one another. Love one another. That's all he would say. Love one another. And so I think when we look back over the last few weeks, we look at last week, we talked about tough love. And sometimes tough love is speaking the truth, but speaking the truth in love. How would I want this truth spoken to me? Listen, I've had truth spoken to me in love and still got mad. Right? And defensive. But you know the wonderful part about the love aspect of that is it causes you to go away knowing these people love you and deal with it. I've had Sheila many times speak to me something in love, not pulling her sword out and stabbing me with it. Now get all blah, blah, blah. And she'd leave it alone. And I'd go away and God would say, mm-hmm. Did you hear that? Yeah. Why'd you get so upset? I said, probably because it's true. Yeah. And she loves you and doesn't want to see you get into future trouble with this stuff. Many times in my life, that precious one has come to me and shared something. In my early years, because of pride and all that kind of stuff, yeah, I'd rise up, but because I knew she loved me, I did hear it. And that works the other way. So speaking the truth in love, there's those words filled with grace, and they're not easy words sometimes. But a wise person is able to receive those kinds of words ultimately. Wisdom and maturity and all those blessed things that we long for in our lives, you know, they come from bridling the tongue. They come from walking in wisdom. The sad part is it's not a wand that we can wave. It's a day-by-day walk. And as I was looking over this and thinking about it, I realized just how much I needed to hear this. And how far I've got to go when I look at those words and realize, I mean, I think they're words, when we think about it, and I'll close with this. They're words that sometimes you speak in a situation that you have no business speaking in that situation, but are not bad words. Understand what I'm saying? Apples of gold, there's a word for it, but it's spoken in the right context, in the right place. But the ones, and I've caught myself this week in certain company saying certain things just out of anger